Jerry says, nowhere on 3 credit reports does my full name appear, including suffix third. Okay. It's recently updated with open credit. Question 1, can I compel the deletion of all other forms of my name? So in general, yes, because the credit report has to be accurate. And I'll use myself as now I'm just John G. Watts. That's all I am. But let's say I was John G. Watts the third. Okay. And they had my name as John G. Watts, John G. Watts Jr., John G. Watts the second. Well, I could dispute that and say, hey, that's not me. I'm the third. Okay. I'm not the second, or I'm not a junior. I'm not a senior. I'm the third. Now, part of the difficulty for the credit bureaus is there will be some of these furnishers that furnish or provide information that will only list just your first and last name. Okay. So they may have it recorded in there that like this Capital One account goes with John G. Watts Jr. Okay. Or just John G. Watts. And so what you would want to do is a couple of things. First of all, you want to prove exactly your name. So, here's my birth certificate, here's a tax form, here's my driver's license. And you've got to make sure that you're being consistent in your life with using, in my example, John G. Watts the third. Okay. So if my driver's license just says John G. Watts and my tax form says John G. Watts, well, it's kind of hard for me to fuss at the credit bureaus for not using John G. Watts the third. Okay. So you want to have some consistency there. And so send that to them. The other thing to keep in mind is if they delete one of those names, that could make one or more of your accounts go away. Now, if they're negative accounts, maybe you don't care, but it could be a positive account if that account is kind of tied with that particular form of the name. Okay. Now, it's unlikely stuff will be deleted just because of that, but you certainly have the right to have accurate credit reports, and that includes your information. So, if your name has changed, you can, request that they delete all other forms of it. And so let's see, there may be a follow-up question here. Okay. Yeah. So Jerry says, and can I compel the deletion of certain old addresses since they are associated with non-full name with suffix third? Well, I'll just say this, not necessarily because they're tied to a certain name, but just if it's not an accurate address. Okay. So let's take a couple of examples. So let's say I live right now at 123 Main Street, and they have on there 789 First Avenue. Okay. Now, I never lived at 789 First Avenue, Birmingham, Alabama. Well, that's easy. I'd say I never lived there. Here's my driver's license, or, here's an affidavit, just have a notary, sign saying that you put this under oath, or just put in the letter, like I just have never lived there. Okay. And so that's one way to do it. If you did live there, and so you don't currently live there, it's a little bit of a gray area. And by that, I mean, it is accurate that you used to live there. But personally, if it's the previous address I was at, I may want to leave that, just because until you get a certain amount of history, usually a couple years at your new address, sometimes they want that previous address. But if we're talking like an address 4 places ago or 4 years ago, then there's nothing wrong with disputing that and saying, hey, I want that address off. But then this is sort of my rule with doing disputes. You say, here's what I want because, or so that, or here's the reason why. And then you give the reason why. So I don't want these old addresses because I don't want any, mail or pre-approved cards or anything like that going to that old address where I don't live. Obviously, it's too late for the Postal Service to be forwarding that address. So I don't want to be the victim of identity theft because you have these old addresses on there from 4 years ago or 14 years ago or 44 years ago. And so it's not so much, in my view, that it's tied to the first or the second or the third in terms of your name, but more of just, I don't live there. And if you never lived there, that's easy. If you used to live there, you can say, this is no longer accurate. Okay. I no longer have an address of 789 First Avenue North. Okay. So I hope that that's helpful to you, Jerry. Very good questions.